Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Rhonda Farrell bringing you our February webinar for Innovation Division and Government Division, Mr. Peter Lierney, who is going to be talking about the future of business development and innovative approach to dialogue and decision makers. Boy, are you in for a treat, because not only do we have a phenomenal practitioner, we have an engineer, an entrepreneur, an author with a wide spectrum of background in many different industry areas, starting out with military, working for federal, state, local, and international market spaces. And as you can see, a wide range of roles all across the business development lifecycle. Not only is he an innovator, an entrepreneur, and an author, he also is a scholar and has degrees in a wide range of areas, including business and information systems, as well as professional certifications in many different areas you all probably cover down on. So help me welcome our phenomenal speaker to our virtual stage tonight, Mr. Peter Lierney. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Farrell. Can you see my screens? If I do a screen share now, can I do that?
Please, sir. Yes, we're ready for you.
Okay. You see my screen? Are we good to go?
Absolutely perfect. Thank you, sir.
Well, wonderful. Everyone here in the United States and outside the United States, thank you for giving me the privilege to make this presentation this evening. Where I am, at least, it's evening. And also on the call with me are two of my business partners and two individuals that are responsible for many of the things that I'm going to share today. And so whenever I say I always think we, those two individuals is Mr. Mario Pina, who's a phenomenal software and systems engineer who has automated my thinking, and Mr. Scott Donaldson, who is co-authored many books in security and technology and other things. And he's influenced me professionally over the decades, and is he and I and Mario co-authoring a book which will be out in a couple of months that highlights a lot of what we'll be talking about this evening. So again, my name is Peter Lierney, and we're going to talk about the topic of innovation, and I picked something where I introduced innovations. For the past 25 plus years, I have been in U.S. federal contracting. And what I hope tonight when I speak is that, and what you hear is that the things I'm going to share, you'll take something away that'll be benefit to you if you try to do a competitive procurement in the business to government or even business to business market space, no matter what your role might be, that there might be something in here that you will take away. And so let's move on. I think when we're trying to do a competitive procurement, all right, where particularly I'm going to speak from the point of view of federal government, but it applies to federal, state, local, and even in the business to business, the most important question is why your company? Why your company? And how do you answer that question? Well, we're all a product of our environment, and I'm going to sort of go through how I got to answering that question, how I do it with my clients, and other things. Oops, let's see. It's right there. Okay, great. This is a quote from a famous author, Maya Angelou, and I always like this. A friend may be waiting behind a stranger's face. And regrettably, I can't meet you, any of you personally, but if you're ever in the National Capital Region of Washington, D.C., or if you ever want to connect with me on LinkedIn and do a Zoom or a Teams call, I'd always be welcome to answering any more questions that you might have after this evening. Now, another quote that I always liked was from this playwright. It's not the answer that enlightens, but the question. And in this presentation tonight, I'm going to use many different questions as a catalyst to make my points. So I believe that in everything in life, we're all a product of our environment. But more importantly, what's our belief system? What's our, what creed do we have? If you're a doctor, you got the Hippocratic Oath. For me, I worked in firms where we did delivery for programs that were everything from science, from soldier to science, as we would say. And a lot of the programs were very high dollar value, solution-based, mission-critical prime contracts with the U.S. federal government. And I always had a creed that I lived by. And my role was doing delivery, managing programs, and eventually doing this role called capture manager. And a capture manager is essentially the one who has to answer that question. How are we going to win and make it real? But you can see a creed that I live by, that I developed for myself, and that I live by in that particular role. So in terms of innovation, the first thing I did was I developed a creed for myself. And I think that's important no matter what we do in our professions. Now, we are in a thinking person's business when you want to win a competitive procurement. Now, I've had the privilege of doing competitive procurements in U.S. federal, state, local, United States, and even overseas deals. And in fact, I saw somebody from Australia. One time I helped win a transportation deal with the state of Victoria. But we are in a thinking person's business. When people think about submitting a proposal, right, they think it's a written document. Well, the win is determined well before you put pen to paper. And so I ask us the question in 2025, is thinking dead? Has technology made us think less critically, particularly with the emergence of artificial intelligence? I think not. I think we have to even think more. Now, I go on the premise that winning proposals are engineered and not written. Anybody can write something and produce an output. But to get an outcome, right, where you need to show real benefit realization to the client, real risk mitigation, it's a thinking person's business. And before you engineer anything, you have to do a number of analyses. Or if you did not, you're embedding a lot of risk into what you're trying to engineer. So I go on the premise that winning proposals are engineered, they're not written. Now, very often in the business development life cycle, right? For those of you that are familiar with it, people always think about, well, give me a template, right? Well, templates are not thinking, right? Filling in templates is not critical thinking. And so if you want to put yourself in a position to win, you have to think critically. Now, there's this role in business development, in industry, in business to government, but the role is sometimes called a capture manager. It might have another role. There's business developers. Those individuals might identify where the buffalo are and on the plains, and they might build relationships, but it's the capture manager whose responsibility is to go ask the question, answer the question, how we're going to win. But the key is, besides maybe identifying teaming partners to partner with you or trying to meet with the customer, all essential things, but not sufficient, are they doing the necessary analyses to win? And I knew over the years that that was often not the case. To get competitive advantage in a competitive pursuit, you have to win. Now, in U.S. federal, United States, we have what we call Section M, sets of evaluation criteria. And Section C, that's a part of a solicitation. Those are the requirements. And Section L is the instructions. And we think that the government reads proposals, but they don't. They score them. They score proposals. So they're looking for strengths. And there's a regulation in the United States called the Federal Acquisition Regulation. And there's a part of it, and I think it's like 15-3, And there's also the defense acquisition regulations that define what the government means by strength and deficiency and weakness. But to get those strengths, to get that competitive advantage, is not easy. You have to think, particularly when the contracts are high dollar value, solution-based, mission-critical prime contracts. Now, to go win business in with the government, it costs money. Everything costs money. And so you also have to be able to show what your company is getting out of your capture efforts to win the deal in a way that's traceable, irrefutable, defensible, and explainable, as I like to say. There's also a term in our industry called PWIN, which stands for probability of winning, right? PWIN's probability of winning for short. And people always say, well, what's the PWIN? And it becomes this fictitious number. Oh, it's 65%. Well, it's not enough to get you to your ultimate destination for a win if you think you have a 65-75% chance winning. You have to do the necessary upfront analyses to win. And very often in our industry, people think, well, if I buy business intelligence from a third party, that will give me competitive advantage. And the truth is, it will not. It just gives you competitive parity. Because if a competitor can buy the same information I can buy, where's the advantage? So buying third-party business intelligence is essential, but it's not sufficient. And so over the years, when I was doing capture, I just started thinking a certain way. And I was with a firm many years ago, and we were very successfully acquired. And after that firm was acquired, I had won the last deal of that company. It was a $55 million deal in the Pentagon the last week before we got acquired. Some number of, about 2 years later, the founder pulled me aside and he said, you know, whatever's going on in your head, you have to put it down. Because he was always referring me to teach companies how I thought, but I never had it materially down. So one day I put it down and I had a picture, I had a framework essentially. And he said to me, you know, you closed the gap in the market because the market doesn't show us how to think. They tell us what to do, but now not how to think. So in our industry, there are business intelligence tools, there are customer relationship management tools, all essential tools. There are proposal workflow tools. There are tools that help with shredding natural language parsers that help with compliance. A lot of these tools now are being automated with artificial intelligence capabilities. However, none of them address the thinking gap. So I had essentially developed a framework I had called the Solution Engineering Framework, and I was doing it, that closed this gap. And this is where the journey begins, because what I'm focusing on in this thinking gap is gathering authentic intelligence. That's what's missing from all these people who are buying into the AI today, who's typically being pushed by investors, just like crypto was, and electric vehicles, and all the things that you can imagine. You can read in the Wall Street Journal. It's the same thing. Pick the next technology on the Gartner hype curve, and it'll be the same thing 2 years from now. I'm not a Luddite. I believe in artificial intelligence, but it's not better than authentic intelligence. And so context of the customer. I think there's an MIT professor once said, like, context is worth like 85, 90 IQ points. So when you want to win a competitive pursuit, you have to have context of your customer, and you have to make sure, you know, is it correct? Is it current? Does it align with the customer psychographics? Because we're always dealing with human beings, and that's the limitation of AI. That's why authentic intelligence is more important. But how do we get it? Machine cannot help us get authentic intelligence. So this context to win a competitive pursuit, we need context of the company that we work for. Do we know our company's capabilities, its past performance, its subject matter experts? Context, because know thyself first. Do we know context of the customer, right? Its mission area, right? Do we know context of our competition? And we have to put this context together to eventually help address the client's needs at the right price. All things we have to think about when we want to win a competitive pursuit. Again, when we're doing these analyses, this information from our capture efforts, as we like to say, because the business development lifecycle consists of, say, opportunity assessment and capture management activities and pre-proposal planning activities, and also proposal development activities, and eventually an evaluation and contract award. But everything we do has to be traceable, irrefutable, defensible, and explainable. So here is an illustration of something that many of you who are probably engineers are familiar with. It's a little cartoonish, but it's the cone of uncertainty. So in my career, I spent about over 12 years assessing very large weapons programs. And what you realize after you look at, you do dozens and dozens and dozens of these reviews over the years, is like certain risk is very acceptable at the beginning of the systems development life cycle, but it's not acceptable later on. So for example, if I'm building a helicopter, if I have risk with tooling in a facility, that's very acceptable at the phase where before I pick the preferred concept for the helicopter. But it's not acceptable if when that helicopter needs to go into full rate production. And so what you need to do is you need to figure out, hey, how do we squeeze down this risk, which I mean really uncertainty, as quickly as possible so we can make the right decisions. Uncertainty on a positive side is opportunity, which if we realize it, it provides benefit. And uncertainty on the negative side, risk, which is realized it becomes an issue. And you want to analyze things and squeeze down this uncertainty as quickly as possible to make the right risk-based decisions. Well, over the years, as I was delivering with my clients at the same time supporting winning business, this started influencing how I was thinking. And therefore, a certain kind of risk in the very beginning of a business opportunity was acceptable, but not acceptable later on. And as we're squeezing down this uncertainty, what are we doing? We're getting more context, more understanding of the customer, the competition, ourselves to make the right risk-based decisions. So how did I do this? Well, the way I was doing it was there was a picture in my head. I was just doing things, but I really never materially had it down. And then when I was finally encouraged to put it down, and this individual, very successful man, very wealthy man, said to me, you closed the gap in the market. It doesn't show us how to think. And so when I had this picture, which I call the solution engineering framework, what it does is it helps do the necessary upfront thinking before the writing to a competitive response. And before in 2025 times, for people that might be thinking they're applying generative AI before trying to do a prompt. Because as I like to say, what are you prompting on? If you haven't done the upfront analyses, people like to say, well, use generative AI to generate a proposal, and then you can spend more time doing strategic thinking. Wrong answer. That's like designing security into your software. After it's already deployed, it's too late. You have to be doing the thinking and the strategic analysis to get the insight and understanding before you do a generative AI prompt. Otherwise, what's the basis of your prompting, and how do you know with what you come back is good enough? So, and the same thing in terms of writing, right? You have to think before you write, correct? So this is what the framework helps us do. So when I had built this framework, and I had built about 9 years ago, a body of knowledge around it. Like, well, what were the considerations I was using on this framework of these different analyses? What were the techniques I was using? And I started teaching a course around it. And eventually there was a man, and he was the first federal chief information officer in the United States, a very brilliant man. And he asked me, he says, Peter, come work with me. You can protect your IP. And I want you to apply that framework on deals in the US, in the States, not federal, and overseas. And every place we applied that thinking with the sales executives on new opportunities or the client executives and the recompetes, won almost $1 billion worth of competitive wins. So what I'm going to walk you through is the thinking in a high level of this framework, which I call the solution engineering framework. So the first thing you got to do is you have to understand what's keeping the customer up at night. What are those external influences? If you look into a customer organization, as you walk down from the head of the agency, for example, in government, to a CIO and down, what's keeping them up at night? And in particularly, you might identify 40 things that are keeping them up at night, but 40 is too many. You got to be focused. What are the top 4 to 7? And in particular, anybody can identify an issue. And I use the word issue generally and as a general term. It could be a concern, a fear, a stress, a worry, whatever's keeping them up at night. But anybody can do that. But the secret sauce is, why is it an issue to them? Why? And do you know the priority of those issues? And do you know the customer psychographics around those issues in terms of on the customer side, who's the influencer? Who's the decision maker, as an example? What's their personality type? Are they an egotist? Are they a visionary? How do they feel about your company? Are they an advocate, an adversary, more they agnostic? So this is where the journey starts, doing this type of analysis we call issue analysis. Then we need to understand what the key factors are. And key factors are not requirements, but they'll help form requirements. They're not the solution. They'll help frame the solution. What key factors are is, what does any competitor have to bring to the table to address the 4 to 7 issues that you've identified that are driving those requirements? And just as the secret sauce was behind the issues was why there were issues, the secret sauce behind the key factors is, why are they important to the customer? And we look at them from 4 different types of analyses. A technical key factor analysis. And technical you might be doing software development or accounting forensics. It's a general term. What are the management key factors? What are those factors we have to use to bring the program, should we be awarded within cost, schedule, performance thresholds? What are the personnel key factors? And what are the corporate experience key factors? So key factor, for example, as I always like to use an example, the government might say that they want somebody as a program manager with a certain certification and so many years of experience in a particular domain. But they'll never say that they want experience of the person walking the halls of an agency and who know the personalities and politics of the building and know how to deal with the difficult people. But they know that's important, but they'll never put that in a solicitation document. But when you put your key person, your program manager forward, even though that was never stated in requirements, you know that you're going to make sure you addressed it. And all good things in life are tested. So you want to make sure, to the extent that you can, you test your issues and key factors and validate them with the client. And if we know the issues and key factors, those are the things that are driving requirements. We all see requirements in a competitive bid, but do we know what's driving them? And as I always tell companies, if you don't know the issues and key factors that are driving requirements, you should not be bidding on the opportunity, right? Because that's the foundation. It's like building a house on sand. Now we look at something called the notional winner, the ideal winner. Well, the ideal winner doesn't exist because there's nothing ideal in life. But we're looking for the top 10 attributes of the ideal winner and why they're important to the customer, and again, the customer psychographics. So if we've done a key factor analysis, we're in a better position to identify the top 10 attributes. And there was a football coach from a long time ago called Vince Lombardi that said, if you shoot for perfection, you hit excellence. And so we're using the notion winner benchmark just to guide us. But on the flip side of that, when you're doing a competitive pursuit, you have to look internally. What are your company's internal challenges, conditions, constraints? I call them design considerations. Because it's like when you have a helicopter, you're building a system, you might have space, weight, and power limitations. But these design considerations are not weaknesses that might come of a SWOT analysis, but they're things that are just inherently weak in your problems in your company, that no matter who you hire and you put in charge of that capture, you're not going to win unless you fix what's wrong inside your own house. As an example, if your company has been on a contract for 5 years and they've been screwing up the invoices for 5 years on a $100 million contract, and this contract's coming up for recompete, no matter how much that capture manager wants to help win the deal, the government's already decided, the customer's already decided, they love your people, but they're going to trade out in your company because they're just tired of dealing with you, and those kind of things. And so we have to look inside negatively. And sometimes that's hard to do, but you got to be honest when you want to win. So now if I've done my due diligence where I know the issues and why the issues and their priority in the top 47, and I know the key factors, the top 5 to 6 technical and top 5 to 6 management and corporate experience of personnel, and I know why they're important to the customer, and I know what the ideal winner looks like, and I know what our internal challenges are and constraints. I'm in a position now to do a competitive assessment. And in a competitive assessment, what are we trying to really do? We're trying to identify our strengths and our weaknesses and our competitors' strengths and weaknesses, so we can highlight our strengths to the customer, minimize our weaknesses, neutralize the competitor strengths, exploit their weaknesses, or neutralize how they might counter how they might exploit our weaknesses, or counter how they might neutralize our strengths. And so there's different techniques we could do. We could do something called a SWOT analysis, a strength, weakness, opportunity threat analysis, or a bit of comparison, where you do an apples to apples weighted comparison of, like, say, our company's ERP modules to a competitor's ERP modules, or Porter 5 Forces analysis from Michael Porter. We're looking at the power position of the customer, the power position of the incumbent on a competitive pursuit, or the power position of suppliers who are dependent upon, or the power position of somebody trying to break in, or something we call, it's a term called Black Hat Review, where we hire or get individuals who are subject matter experts on our competition who can truly tell us, hey, how is competitor XYZ going to address this customer issue? Or what do you think their strategies to win the deal is going to be? Or what do you think their discriminators are? So these techniques, you could use one, some, or all. But when we're doing these techniques, and something I want to bring up and highlight that I didn't say yet, and I should have said it back when I started talking about issues. The essence of winning a competitive pursuit, particularly one that is high dollar value, solution-based, mission critical, and a prime contract, is not technology. It is not technology. It is dialogue. It is collaborative dialogue. So the framework, what it's helping us do, it's letting us do different analyses and techniques within some of those analyses, but it's allowing us to come together with information from many diverse sources, issue analysis, key factor, notion winner benchmark, in this case, different competitive assessment techniques, and have that dialogue to get doing a particular type of analysis, getting insight and understanding and making a decision, and then using the output of that analysis as an input to support a subsequent analysis. And in our world, as we're using the framework, and in particular with my partners, the software we developed, and this is why we developed a software that is a new kind of software in the marketplace, it's federating our thinking. It's keeping the continuity of thought. So whenever we're doing something, we always know at any time where its legacy is, what its origin was, in a traceable, defensible, explainable manner. And so when you use these different techniques, in this case, if I was doing a SWOT analysis, why would I do a bit of comparison? Because if I'm doing a SWOT, I have a certain type of mental model, and we have a certain type of dialogue. And I'm identifying strengths and weaknesses for myself and my competitor. But if I say, hey, let's also do a bit of comparison, now we're having a different type of dialogue, which we're using a different mental model. And now we're putting ourselves in position to identify more strengths and more weaknesses for ourselves and our competitors that we might not have identified if we just left the SWOT alone, to the SWOT analysis alone. So when you're doing the competitive assessment and you sort of get a point like, hey, you know, why our company or why not our company? The most important thing that's coming out at this point, though, is what are my company's discriminators? And as I always tell people, if you do not have a discriminator, you should not be priming an opportunity. Now, in business development, there's two terms. There's a term called differentiator and discriminator. But let us look at discriminator as differentiator rather, as little d. Two things might be different, but when you're discriminating, it's a completely different level. And in my world, when I qualify a discriminator, many people who I compete against, they would say, well, we're unique. Well, that's essential, but that's not sufficient. And that's where most people start and stop. To qualify a discriminator in terms of your company's offering, one, you should know that the competition can't make the same claim. Two, you need to know how it helps the customer, who it helps, why it's important to them, the benefit they get, ideally quantify the benefit or the risk it mitigates. And you need to be able to substantiate it with a proof point. It's an end statement. All those things have to be true. And if you don't have at least one qualified discriminator that you've tested with the customer, you should not be trying to prime the opportunity. So if I say I have a discriminator, I can show you the body of evidence. Like, for example, in the United States, we do things in the government, particularly in the Department of Defense, called technology readiness levels, TRLs, and there's different levels. But you can't just say something's a certain technology level, say technology level 6. You have to have a material body of evidence behind it to show, just like in anything in science and medicine, you have to have the material body of evidence to substantiate it. Well, from these analyses, I just can't say, well, that's a discriminator. I need to have shown my analyses and how I'm getting there. Because very often in business development, there's a lot of BSers, and you could fill out the words for yourself. And they're up there presenting, but there's nothing behind what they're presenting. But me and my approach, how I always did, and I was successful, I took a systems engineering approach to the thinking process of winning a competitive pursuit. And whenever we do a pursuit, we're always going to have gaps. We're going to have gaps in our capabilities, in our credibility, in our context of the customer, or our past performance, or our relationship with the customer. And then the sooner we do these analyses and the better we do them, and we understand what those gaps are, that will help us take the necessary actions to close them. But what we need to formulate is a win strategy. And a win strategy, how we're going to win. Those top 7 or 8 steps that show how we're going to win strategically, that factor in our company's offering and our circumstances of our company, such that if I have a PowerPoint slide and I have 7 or 8 bulleted items that I show my executive team, this is how we're going to win this high dollar value deal, I can, in a traceable, defensible, explainable manner, show them how I got there. A visible blueprint, which I do, as well as the digital information and the material evidence to back it up. And many of you may not know this, but there's this term called win themes of winning competitive procurements. And I never met a government evaluator who even knows what one is, but they've taken a life of their own in business development in the United States, in the government space, particularly federal. But I look at them like principles of an architecture. If you have a software system and it has issues, it's typically because you didn't adhere to the architecture. And you have an issue with your architecture, rather. And if you have an issue with your architecture, it's typically because you didn't adhere to the principles of the architecture. Like, I want the software to be scalable, extensible, portable. So these win themes are these meta themes that transcend our whole offering, that show the customer the value they're getting. Well, a theme is a feature benefit proof point. And there's 2 types of themes. The feature is what the customer's getting, the benefit they get, and the proof point, how we substantiate it. Well, we might have 3 or 5 win themes, which are these meta themes, but we might have dozens and dozens of these things called proposal themes that substantiate those win themes. Well, as I always teach, if your win themes discriminate, your feature is not discriminating, it's a weak win theme. So if you qualify as a discriminator, you get a twofer. You'll automatically get your win themes. And then often in the pursuit, there's the tactical things you have to do. Oh, I need to develop a position description for recruiting on a type of chief engineer we need, or a type of program manager, or I need to locate real estate within a mile of this military installation and and make sure it has a secure facility. So these are the kinds of responsibilities, but the primary responsibility of a capture manager is the thinking, so we can take the necessary actions to enable us to get to the win. Where the winning comes into play are these things called proposal strategies. I break them up in what I call big G strategies and little g strategies. G standing for the word ghosting. Now, I'm not talking about the Gen Z ghosting in terms of relationship. I'm more so talking about the great brain Adam Smith and his book, Wealth of Nations and the Invisible Hand. How do we influence the customer before they can no longer speak to us? So as long as we're allowed to legally and ethically talk to them, those are called big G strategies. How do we influence them? so we can shape the competition in our favor? And how can we influence the customer strategically in our material response when a proposal submission? As an example, maybe a big G strategy might be if it is in the United States and it's a military facility, and we have a secure software development facility a mile outside the military base. I want to take the customer maybe 6 months before the solicitation is released on a tour of the facility and show them, hey, someday we're going to bid on this contract that's coming out. And we hope to have them work in this facility. Well, I can legally still do that. And then materially in response, when I submit my written proposal, I actually include a photograph of that facility that's all ready to go on day one. And that's what we mean by these strategies. And we use these strategies, we use the analyses from the SWOT, the bidder, the porter, the black hat, if we did one, some or all those, the discriminator qualification, the gap analysis. We use these proposal strategy inputs to formulate the strategies themselves, how we're going to do certain things. Because the solution, we use them as the basis for our solution. Now, in the United States, the government, the federal government, and most governments, because I've done state, local, and overseas deals, governments do not buy technology. They do not buy technology. Governments buy benefits. They want quantifiable benefit realization, and they don't want risk. So the solution is really a set of things. And so you can look at these win themes that I mentioned earlier as the mortar. So the partners I pick on my team, my industry partners, vendors, they make part of my team. They're part of my solution. And because they need to give benefit realization and or risk mitigation, ideally quantifiable benefit realization to the customer should they pick us. The past performances I pick forth that I've shown that I've done this before and I've delivered it successfully within cost schedule performance thresholds, this type of work. And I'm bringing lessons learned, right? So that I'm not learning on this client. The key people that I bring forth, my program manager, my solution architect, or my technical approach, or my management approach, or the frameworks and methods and tools I use to enable my approaches, or my staffing solution, or my pricing and the basis of estimate. All those things are what I call the integrated solution set. The solution is a set of things, and each one of those components that I mentioned, bound by this mortar, the win themes, each has to generate as many as possible quantifiable benefits for the customer, right? And show risk mitigation. That's what the customer is really looking for. Whenever a smart technical person says, oh, they love our technology, and they go to the whiteboard and they say, this is the technology we're going to give to them. Guess what? You're going to lose. They don't buy technology. You got to communicate the benefit they're getting should they choose you, or the risk that's being mitigated. So really quickly, on each of these techniques, in terms of my teaming partners, it's not that I'm picking a company ABC to be my teaming partner. I have a sound rationale on why I'm picking them, going back from the issues and key factors that are driving the requirements to when I did my competitive assessment and identified I had a particular weakness, which was really end up one of my bigger gaps that I know I had to bring this partner, this vendor on my team to close that gap, right? So the partners we pick, or the past performances we're putting forth, that we can show the customer that we've delivered this kind of program before. So on each of these, you want to do an analysis on your partners, on your past performances, do due diligence on them, and then squeeze out strengths, again, in the form of quantifiable benefits and or risk mitigated. Because as I said earlier, in the United States, particularly in the federal government people do not read proposals, they score them. So if the strengths don't pop off the page in 7 to 10 seconds, they're off the page. But you can't get the strengths by writing them in. Like I said, it's like designing security into the software. It's too late. You can only get the strengths and the strategies if you do the analyses. So in my world, as I was always applying this framework and I was doing these analyses as part of a capture manager, I was building an inventory of strategies to apply, building an inventory of strengths. And I knew I had the points against the evaluation factors in advance of the writing to win before pen was put to paper. And that's why, for example, part of the challenge today with artificial intelligence, it's productivity. It'll generate output, but output is not outcome. there's no shortcuts in life. You still got to do the work. The business of winning a competitive procurement, when you're trying to solve problems for governments in particular, and to me, getting a contract with the government, particularly my government, US federal, has always been a privilege, because we're helping the nation's security, prosperity, overall well-being. And that would be true for any country in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, in South America. If you're a citizen of a country and you have the privilege providing services and products to your country, and you get that through and particularly a competitive procurement, you have to earn it. Because when you're doing this analysis, we know there's a difference between winning a deal and executing it. But when you're doing it this way, you're squeezing risk out of the execution. So you have increased the likelihood of having successful delivery. Very often, programs don't meet cost, schedule, performance thresholds because, yes, a company won a contract, but they wrote a convincing proposal. It was compelling, but they didn't do their homework. And so, therefore, what are you doing? You're hurting your past performance. You're going to fail. You're going to hurt you're not going to get the recompete. If it's a recompete contract, you're going to hurt your reputation. And so there's no shortcuts. Again, when we look at our people, doing a due diligence, looking at years of experience of our key people, the people we're putting forth to manage the contract, or our technical approach. Or so if I have a solution architect, I'm giving them the analyses to substantiate what I need you to highlight this strength. I need you to minimize this weakness we have. I need you to think about this when you're formulating your technical solution, that we have to exploit their weakness or neutralize the competitor's strength. And just like also in terms of how we're going to manage the contract, or the frameworks, methods, and tools that we use to enable our technical management approaches, or and also checking that everything is always aligned, that I'm just not, if I'm using a particular framework or tool to enable my technical approach, that technical approach traces back, addresses a requirement, and it supports issues and key factors that are driving those requirements. So just like when you're engineering a system, right? You just don't have things there for the sake of having them. They serve a purpose. And again, we're looking for quantifiable benefits, and we're looking for risk reduction in our staffing, as well as particularly pricing. Now, very often you find that customers go for the lowest price when you have not discriminated yourself. So if you have a number of vendors and they all look the same, the customer will default to lowest price. But you don't want it to come down to a price battle, because I've often seen where customers will pay the higher price because they've seen a demonstrated value. And you can't get there unless you think. You can't have a bunch of people around a table with just trying to make stuff up or think stuff, or the biggest personality. The value of the solution engineering framework has been, it's brought those people together to do those collaborative analyses, to do that facilitative dialogue, such that when you look at the evaluation factors in the US federal, we call it section M of a solicitation, that you have the inventory of strengths against those factors. And when there's a particular factor or sub-factor in a solicitation, that you can show that the government can see in a traceable, defensible manner, hey, these guys understand us. Again, it's about building an inventory of strengths in advance of the writing. If you don't have the strengths in advance of writing a proposal, and you can't get the strengths unless you do the analyses, what are you writing to? Generative AI cannot do this for you. Generative AI cannot scrape your servers and say this is a strength, because what's it based on? And then how do you know if it's good? So just like when you engineer a system, you have to do early systems engineering. You have to do systems analysis. You want to win a high dollar value solution-based mission critical prime contract, you got to do the necessary dialogue-based analyses in a collaborative manner to win. The framework that I developed, the innovative framework, has successfully proven to be able to do this, because really it's about delivering value, particularly to our government. Me as a citizen of the United States, US government, right? But no matter where you might be, whoever your customer is, delivering real value. Such that we can answer that question in a traceable, defensible, explainable manner why our company. Now, one last thing, you have business developers. I mean, there's thousands of them all over the United States doing federal procurements, and they every 2 weeks, maybe there's a business development review. and they might be showing on a PowerPoint slide to their executives, this is the win strategy. But there's nothing behind those slides. There's nothing. And I come to realize that. They're BSing everybody. In my world, though, where I come from, I can show you visually and provide the material evidence to back that up. And why is that important? Because I'm setting everybody up downstream for success. The solution architect, the proposal manager, the pricers, the people, the subject matter experts who are going to be asked to contribute. I'm setting them up for success, and that's the key. And so just like in math that we learned when we were kids, y is a function of x. Remember that term I used, P-win, probability of winning? Well, it's really a very fictitious number. It means nothing to me. It's like the temperature of the day, which always changes. What I really cared about was, are you doing the right things? Are you doing them well? And can you show material evidence of it? Because if you can't show material evidence that you did the analyses, the thinking, right, then you might as well not have done it. It doesn't exist. And you set everybody else up for failure. And so very often what we like to do is we like to hire third parties, consultants to come in and help us. They could be, for example, to help us write the proposal or whatever the case might be, to help us do pricing on a competitive procurement. Well, there's no shortcuts in life. If you're a company, unless you've done the upfront analyses in advance of bringing that third party in, that company is just going to generate an output for you and not get you to an outcome. They'll charge you money. It'll be compliant. It'll be on time. But unless you did your part collaboratively in advance of them coming in and giving them the context that you have of your company, the customer, and competition that's analysis based, giving them the strategies, setting them up for success to help you, they're not going to be able to help you get a win. And I always make that. You're just wasting your money. And particularly if you want to go for the high dollar value contracts, shooting the rhinos, not trying to shoot rabbits or squirrels. And what the framework has allowed me to do over years is to in a very efficient manner, get people to collaboratively think. And so, really, I always ask, when you're doing a competitive pursuit, do you have the right tools to do this type of analysis? So the gentleman who years ago encouraged me to put my thinking down, and he said, hey, you close the gap in the market. That same individual years later encouraged me to publish a book around it, which I published. And subsequently, what he did was, he said, the problem is you're the product. So he goes, you should develop a software around it. So myself and actually two partners I have here, a few years ago, we developed a software around it we call Solution Engineering Tool, set for short, which we use when we consult with our clients. And we have other consultants that license it with their clients. But it's an automation of that framework. And really, it's an enterprise-based, collaborative, strategic analysis support system. It's a thinking tool. It helps us collaboratively think. And as we're doing analyses collaboratively, and we're getting the insight and understanding, the data is staying federated. The thinking is getting federated. So I have an inventory of strengths, and I can take any strength and show you how that strength was derived, what its lineage was, or that strategy. And so, and every time we do it, we're building a visual blueprint of the win, capturing the intellectual capital of the organization. So what we're doing is in our software is we're building a data lake over time of authentic intelligence, because at time zero, all of our data is analyzed and it's tagged. And therefore, when we do apply artificial intelligence to it, then we know it has good pedigree. What's it based on? And does it help answer our question? And so the big takeaways on this for me are, that I want to share with you is, I focus with my partners innovating the thinking process to win competitive procurements. All right. And the thinking can be applied, although it's been applied successfully in US federal, it's been applied in US state, local, and overseas deals, like in UK with Met Police, or in the Philippines, or in Australia. We are in a thinking person's business. You want to win a competitive pursuit, business to government, business to business, let the foolish people jump and write. Let the foolish people immediately jump and use generative AI, right? There's no shortcuts. You have to think first, okay? If you don't have the strategies advanced to the writing, then when you're writing to, you cannot score the points in competitive bid, right? So you have to do the upfront analyses to formulate the strategies, develop the strengths. And the solution engineering framework, which I sort of walk through in asking these questions in a more illustrative manner using these cartoons, is a simple yet powerful way to collaboratively take an engineering-based approach to thinking. Plus, it's automated in terms of a software that we developed called SET. And there's a book behind this, and every book's available on Amazon called a Solution Engineering Framework. But if you ever meet me for lunch in the National Capital Region, or if I'm in a city where you are and I meet you, I'll give you a copy. There's another book that I wrote. It's more an illustrated version. And my two partners and I right now are coming out with a third book right now called Missing Measures of Competitive Procurements. How well is your company doing today to win a business tomorrow? It focuses on, it'll be out in a couple of months, 8 indices where what we do is we could tell you a quantitative index, qualitative and quantitative index. Does this belong in my pipeline or not of opportunities? We could quantitatively measure the goodness of the evolving business development opportunities. How well do we understand the opportunity, bid it or not? What's the goodness of our win strategy? What's the goodness of our offering? How ready are we for recompete? We can measure the growth status of a company called Growth Status Index. And so that book we're very proud of, and that'll be out soon. And all of this thinking is also reflected in the software that we have, and we teach it when we consult, and when we train companies, and we teach it when we consult as well. So there I'll stop, and I said a lot, and I just want to do a compass check on how much time we have, asking if anybody has any questions. And thank you for the privilege of allowing me to share what I shared with you.
Thank you so much, Peter. We love your topic. And yes, you have questions in the chat. So we'll go first and foremost. And we have a question from Yolanda, and she says, you mentioned.
Where's Yolanda from? Where's she from? Tell me where she's from, who she is.
I don't know. She didn't write that in
Puerto
that
Rico.
chat.
Okay, great. Puerto Rico, wonderful.
Oh, very good. Okay, so she says you've mentioned federated multiple times, and she wants to know, what does that mean in your context?
It's just it's a 10-cent word for integrated. It's a 10-cent word for unified.
There we go. I love it. Okay, we have another one. So from Tracy, and Moses responded, but I think he wants to know, is the capture manager mainly a closer, or is it useful to involve the capture manager early in the project?
Capture manager should be involved early in the project. Okay, early. So for example, if you think of a closer, the capture manager in the US federal is the closer, but I know that different industries, different terms, and they use roles differently, but the capture manager should be setting the closer up for success, if that's the way your company does it. So, you know, the business developer should be setting the capture manager up for success. Very often the business developer and capture manager might be the same person. Very often the capture manager, the closer might be the same person. But anybody who's downstream of you, you got to be, the earlier the capture manager, the person who's helping do the upfront thinkings evolve, the better. And you got to be setting everybody up for success.
Thank you so much. So Peter, we have another one. And this is kind of, I want to drive home the point of your innovation, kind of the creation of this new solution facilitator role in this competitive procurement process. So what key attributes and skills would you say make the most effective solution facilitator, Peter?
Wonderful. One, a systems thinker, because you have to realize that everything is connected to something else. Environmentally, organizationally, from a system perspective, from a statement of work. If you think of the interface diagram, the N-square diagram, everything's connected. If you think of Six Sigma, the acronym SIPOC, supplier input, process output, customer, everything's connected. So one, a systems thinker, good facilitation skills, good soft skills, good communication skills, good consulting skills, the kind of skills that maybe an Accenture or a Boston Consulting Group would hire, for example.
Yes. Thank you, Peter. So given we're talking to part innovation, technical community personnel and part government personnel. You know, maybe can you talk just a minute about the innovation processes you and your team went through to arrive at this, you know, the book, the solution, etc. Is there some technique that you use to kind of help drive this forward so they can kind of understand your innovation development cycle?
Well, one man whose books I read, and I know him personally, is a man named Phil McKinney. He used to be the former chief technology officer at Hewlett Packard. He wrote the book Beyond the Obvious. Very bright man. But, you know, we're all product of our environment. I was a ship driver in the Navy as a young man, and in the United States Navy. And I spent, you always had to be vigilant, right? And I was always assessing large weapons programs when I get out to industry, and I became more of a systems thinker there. And that influenced my mental model. So one, it was the mental model. What's influencing how I think? So whenever I was assigned responsibility to capture a deal, unbeknownst to me, those influences were influencing how I was thinking. Eventually, when I had it in form of a picture, because I was able to visualize it, but I never had it materially down, the concept of the cone of uncertainty and the framework helping squeeze it down just eventually went to building of a course to teach, eventually of a publication of a book, to eventually a development of a software. However, as my two partners will say to me, is that as you're developing software, what it's doing is also you're developing a vocabulary.
Yes.
And we develop the vocabulary and how we communicate. And that vocabulary is also making us think, right? So that hopefully that answered your question, but that was sort of how it came about for us.
I love it. Yes, because there's so much there especially with regard if they're thinking about this, right? The funnel of opportunity and the stagings, the strategic staging as well. One last question, Peter, that we have in here from Moses, and it says, how much lack of capacity can one afford? I'm not quite sure.
Lack of capacity?
Yes, can one afford?
Oh, is he talking about, can you give me some context on how he's using capacity?
Moses, can you add a little bit more to your chat, please, so Peter can answer that?
Oh, capability.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Okay, so now ask him to say that question again, using the word capability now.
Yes. So how much lack of capability can one afford? I'm assuming he was pointing back to your differentiator. Yes.
We all have, when you're doing a competitive procurement, we all have capability gaps. Okay. And so therefore, what you want to understand is what those gaps are as quickly as possible, such that you can find a teaming partner to help close that gap for you. Now, sometimes though, if you're doing a prime contract and you have too much capability gaps and you're bringing on too many teaming partners, then you could be looked at as a thin prime. Like, why am I hiring this guy? Because he has all these teaming partners, right? So maybe, for example, if you have 70% of the or 75% of the capabilities, and you bring on 25% three teaming partners to close the other 25% of capabilities, that's fine. But you cannot have 25% capability as the prime, and everybody else, the other three companies, have 75. So that's a fair question. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, and I think we are at time, Peter. So we're going to thank you so much for your presentation and the phenomenal conversation. Folks on the line, email, website, set, books. He gave so much to you. And then I'm going to share my screen so that we can.
Yeah, and anybody could connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to have any questions or whatever. I'll be happy to do a Zoom or a Teams call with them. Doesn't make a difference where in the world you are. Even if you're in Australia, right? Doesn't make a difference. I'll accommodate your time.
Thank you. And our phenomenal chair, Tracy, put his video on. So I just want to check, does he want to make an announcement before I close? Tracy? No, he's good.
Negative.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you to Peter and thank you, Rhonda, as always, for facilitating so excellently.
Oops.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege to share this, and I hope everybody got something from it. And hopefully, I'll make some new friends out of this. So,
All around the world, Peter. There we go.
all right, stay healthy and well wherever everybody is.
Thank you so much. So again, this is the ASQ Innovation Technical Community 2025. We have our fearless leader here, Mr. Tracy Owens as our chair, Miss Jackie Jolly, our chair-elect, Miss Sonia Montera, our secretary, our immediate past chair, Miss Rebecca Mott, and our financial manager, Mr. Larry Miller. We are always looking for fantastic team members, so here is your email for our chair, Mr. Tracy Owens, or when I send this deck out, just press the volunteer survey link under the here, and we will figure out what you're looking for and how you want to join our innovation community. If you are not a member of ASQ or ASQE, the link to join will be there. If you want to engage in a discussion on our wonderful topic this evening, we will pass our questions to Peter Lierney. You can engage with us in our My ASQ Innovation TC discussion space. And if you are looking for research on innovation as applied to your particular industry, or you want to understand what's trending in the world of ASQE around the globe, please do a Google search for ASQE Insights on Excellence, and we'll be happy to share the topic. And last but not least, before you see our lineup going into the spring and early summer. Our next session will be on March 21st. It will be an EDGE partner event, Dynamic Demand Forecasting in a Post-Pandemic World. And then we will have another session in March, AI in Healthcare, Transforming Manufacturing and Quality Assurance in the Medical Device and Pharmaceutical Industries. You have great speakers coming up, just as we had a phenomenal speaker tonight. So again, thank you so much for Peter Lierney. Tracy, thank you for all that you do from a chair perspective, and everyone on the line. We're so grateful for you joining us. This is ASQ Innovation TC out for this evening, and we welcome you back a little bit later in March for our future lineup. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.